Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to take care of a few housekeeping things. We are recording this, so we want you to all be aware of that. We would like you to keep yourselves on mute, but we also want to have conversation. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know if you have a question during the presentations. If you don't feel like talking on video, I will be monitoring the chat and can ask those questions for you. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Kylie, and she can get us going.
Thanks, Kristen, and thanks to everyone for being here. Hello. I'm normally used to these sorts of meetings happening in webinar format, so not having the opportunity to really talk to each other. But I'll say it's just nice to see your faces, and I hope that we can have a good discussion today, and feel free to jump in and ask good questions of our presenters. I feel like their knowledge and experience is so valuable, so let's make sure to take advantage of it. So I am the program officer for the Women's Foundation of Montana. And for those of you who don't know, the Women's Foundation is a strategic initiative of the Montana Community Foundation. We work to break down barriers to equity for women and girls in Montana and to create a brighter future for women and girls. So joining me in facilitating our conversation today is Elisa Fiaschetti, who is the grant making program officer at the Montana Community Foundation. And so I'm just going to talk with you a little bit about what we've got planned for the next couple of hours, and our presenters will have the opportunity to introduce themselves more fully as their portion of the agenda comes up. But just to lay out what we've got in the works is a cooking demonstration with Mariah Gladstone of Indigikitchen first, which I'm very excited about. I hope most of you received your ingredients. I've got mine prepared behind me, and I'm looking forward to cooking along or hopefully enjoying a cup of tea if you aren't in a kitchen setting today. About an hour in, we'll just take a 5-minute break, give you guys a chance to stretch your legs and do what you need to. And then when we come back, we'll hear from Brenda Richey of Insta-Success with Instapots, Lynette Two Bulls from Yellowbird Lifeway Center, and Lisa Lee from No Kid Hungry. And then we'll have a discussion, Elisa's going to facilitate, about the best way that individual donors and funders can partner with food sovereignty programs in Montana to further that work in a meaningful way. If you haven't had a chance to share a little bit about yourself in the chat box yet, it's always just good for our presenters in particular and for each other to know who's in the virtual room. So if you want to share your name, where you're joining from, and what brought you to the conversation today, that would be great. So before I introduce Mariah, I just want to say that the Women's Foundation comes to this conversation knowing that 66% of households that are struggling with hunger in the US are headed by single moms. We know women and children account for over 70% of the nation's poor. And we know that programs that meaningfully address hunger are a women's issue. And that's how we relate to this conversation today. We also know that food insecurity is way more complicated than simply accessing food. And that understanding the intersection of gender, class, race, and the impact of settler colonialism are critical to our ability to better support Indigenous women in Montana. So the work that these women are doing that they're going to share with you today is critical to addressing health and hunger in a holistic way in their communities, and it's critical to ensuring self-determination of Indigenous communities, and that is what we're really excited to talk about this in that framework today, and to learn from the folks who are here to share that knowledge and their work with us. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mariah and tell you a little bit about her. She's a member of the Blackfeet and Cherokee Nation. She grew up in Northwest Montana on and near the Blackfeet Reservation. She graduated from Columbia University with a degree in environmental engineering and returned home where she began her work on food advocacy. She developed IndigiKitchen, an online cooking platform to revitalize and reimagine native foods. And she's going to demonstrate for us today one of the lessons that she has put out into the world through IndigiKitchen. She was named Champion for Change by the Center for Native American Youth and is currently a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health leader and an MIT Solve Indigenous Communities Fellow. In 2021, she completed her graduate degree at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry and appeared on the Today Show for their Thanksgiving episode and was named a Luce Indigenous Knowledge Fellow by the First Nations Development Institute. So quite an impressive list of accomplishments. We're really grateful that you are here to demonstrate the preparation of your ginger lentil pumpkin soup recipe, to share with us a little bit about how you established your business and to talk about what food sovereignty means for you and your community. So with that, I will hand it over to Mariah, and I would recommend, if you all want a better view of the cooking demonstration, to go into speaker mode on Zoom, which you can do by clicking the view icon in the upper right-hand corner. So Mariah, you go ahead and take it away.
All right, awesome. It is so good to be here with you guys today. I'm super excited to make this cozy, warming soup that uses Indigenous ingredients and a non-Indigenous, but a local Montana ingredient. So I'm going to get us started so that we can let our pumpkin, lentil, sweet potatoes all simmer down. So I'm going to reposition what I'm doing real quickly so that you guys are able to kind of see my preparation board. Let me just swivel everything down so you guys have a better view of my cutting board here. So I have an onion, a sweet potato, and garlic, and some ginger here. So I'm gonna get started preparing some of this stuff. I'm actually gonna cut my onion up first for no reason in particular other than the fact it's the first thing that's gonna go in our pot. And you can use any onion you have for this recipe. I had some yellow onions, but I just found some mold on one of them. So I am using a red onion for this. If you have wild onions that are dried, you can have them for this recipe and add onion flavor with that. So I am just getting started, just peeling my onion so that we can dice it into little pieces. I also am working on waste reduction strategies, like a lot of people are just thinking of how they can reduce the waste in their own lives. And so I'm sure a lot of people are already tossing their kitchen scraps into the compost pile or something like that. But if you guys aren't doing it yet, I find another cool use of kitchen scraps, like onion peels and things like that, is actually you set them aside and then you gather them in like a big Ziploc and stash it in your freezer until you have enough, and then you can make vegetable stock with the scraps. And then you can go throw the scraps in your compost pile. So that is my fun waste reduction strategy lately. And vegetable stock is actually an ingredient in this recipe, though we're not going to make it from scratch as part of this. I'm actually just using some bouillon that's dissolved in water, but you can, of course, it is specifically kind of ratioed out for just using a carton of vegetable stock if you wanted to. If you've never made vegetable stock, it's super easy. You just simmer your vegetables, which can range, but generally consists of onions and garlic and carrots and celery and maybe some potatoes in some water for 30 minutes or so, just enough to extract that flavor, and then straining them out. So much easier than making bone broth, for example. So this red onion that I'm using is obviously a commercial variety, but there are tons of varieties of wild onions across the continent. And I think we have at least 5 different varieties on the Blackfeet Reservation. So I'm sure you guys have come across wild onions before. Things in the allium genus generally smell pretty strong. So we do have lots of wild onions in Montana, but it's not quite onion season. And I didn't have the foresight to dry a whole bunch out for this recipe. Plus, makes it easier for you guys to find onions I'm using in stores. Similarly, this is commercial garlic. And I'm going to use a couple cloves for this. Give us a nice strong garlicky flavor. So I'm going to use the side of my knife. And, oh, I could be a little bit better directional with that. That'll help me get that papery part of the garlic off real fast. You could use minced garlic, pre-minced garlic that you buy in the store if you wanted to, but it's not too hard to use fresh bulbs of garlic. Plus the flavor is so strong, but they're sticky. So we're just going through the work of mincing this up. And then I'm going to peel my sweet potato and cut that up into big chunks. And I'm going to mince up my ginger as well. I am also in this recipe using pureed pumpkin. So I'm using a can of pumpkin. If you process your own pumpkin, you can definitely use that. There's a video on my website about how to process a pumpkin if you've never done it. Super simple. If you ever end up with sugar pumpkins around the fall and need to figure out how to turn them into pie, it's not too hard of a process. It just requires an oven, and I use my blender to puree it, and then it will keep for a while, either frozen or you could do your own canning process or whatever. But I also find that this is a really good use for canned pumpkin besides just pumpkin pies. I was at the store and I was looking around all the canned vegetables because I was thinking that would be where I'd find canned pumpkin. And unfortunately, nobody in the store could tell me where the canned pumpkin was. So I wandered around and eventually found it in the baking section next to like fake lemon pie filling and stuff. So apparently people don't think of pumpkin as anything other than for pies. So we're going to work on changing that. My ginger root, of course, comes in root form like this. If you ever have issues with digestion or just want a nice warming tea, you can cut up some ginger root into nice thin slices and then throw it into some water and boil it on the stovetop for about 30 minutes. Just let it simmer and then add a little bit of honey and you have a really, really nice cozy tea. We're going to use that same warm ginger feel. And I'm just going to cut off about an inch chunk. And then the fastest way that I know of to peel ginger is to take a spoon and just to scrape off that outside papery peel. And that will let you peel the ginger without using like a vegetable peeler and losing so much ginger. That right there takes just the papery part off. So that's what I'm going to do. And the papery part's not bad. It's just kind of a papery texture, similar with garlic and onion papery outsides. Again, same thing with sweet potato. We're going to have to peel our sweet potato, but you'll see I'll do a pretty sloppy job of it because the peel is full of vitamins. It's just a little texture that we could do without. So probably doing a sloppy job peeling this ginger right now too. That's okay. And then I'm going to cut this into pieces as well, similar to how I did my garlic. So there's a whole bunch of substitutions you can make in this recipe. I'm obviously using a sweet potato, which is an indigenous root vegetable to South America. And it works nice as our big chunks of potato that are kind of melting into our soup by the end of the cooking process. But you could do a very, very similar thing with a butternut squash, for example. You could cut up a butternut squash after it's peeled into chunks, and let that cook into the soup too. The flavor and the texture once they're cooked are almost identical. So you could use a butternut squash instead. And of course, butternut squash is a nice winter squash. You could use pumpkin. You could use pieces of pumpkin, and that could just be pieces as opposed to the puree. You can have both in the recipe. So all very, very easy substitutions to make. Another thing, I talked about our Montana ingredient, and I'm using petite crimson lentils from Timeless, which of course started this lentil underground, the revolution in Montana, of recognizing that legumes are really important to our soil health. But similarly, you could use something like tepary beans, which are a really nice drought resistant bean, and have an almost identical flavor, or have an almost identical nutritional content when you compare like fiber and protein levels. But if you use tepary beans, I'd want to cook them ahead of time and then put them in. So that would be my recommendation for that substitution. All right, we're almost done with all of our prep work here. I am just going to peel my sweet potato, and then I'm going to cut it into chunks. So here's my sweet potato here. There is a long history of using root vegetables in the Americas. It's interesting. There was kind of a stigma in Europe for a very long time against root vegetables. They were these underground things that people really didn't want to eat unless they were incredibly hungry. So people might eat some carrots occasionally, onions, things like that, but root vegetables were considered food for extremely poor people, and there was a stigma with them. So even when potatoes were brought back to Europe, they became something that royalty and lords and ruling class people really wanted the peasants to start eating, because there was a relatively high energy content per hectare, right? You can get a lot of potatoes off of a relatively small area of land. But hold on one second. So you can get a relatively large number of potatoes off of a small area of land, but there was this stigma. So the peasants were not immediately adopting potatoes. And so at one point in certain parts of Europe, there were actually laws that were passed that said that in this village, you could only have this communal oven, and the family could only use the communal oven once per week. So people were no longer able to bake all the bread that their family had to eat, because the bread would go hard and they just weren't able to keep up with that. So they had to start eating root vegetables like potatoes, which they could cook at home. And that was how potatoes were forced on European people. However, hold on. I have two dogs wrestling behind the camera, and sometimes they don't understand that they have to be quiet for certain times. So on this continent, we do have a long, wonderful history of root vegetables. So obviously, potatoes are from South America, but in Montana, we have camas. So camas is a root vegetable that grows in generally mountain prairies, high elevation prairies with relatively high moisture content. And camas was traditionally baked underground in a pit for a couple of days. And that ensured all the inulin was cooked in the camas and it wouldn't cause indigestion, but it also caramelized the sugars in the camas. So that made it super delicious. We also have everything from biscuit roots to arrowleaf balsam root to, of course, prairie turnips, which are similar to potatoes, have a lower glycemic value though. So prairie turnips were found around Montana, especially more towards the eastern side of the state in places where we have that sandier soil. You guys can see I'm just cutting up my potatoes into chunks that are about an inch cubed. And we have, let's see, what else? What other root vegetables do we have? We have our, let's see, we have our bitter roots. Obviously, our state flour has a delicious, nutritious root. So I'm realizing I'm looking at all of these things and it's all roots. So that's kind of cool. We're going to swivel over to the stove and start putting some things in a pot over here. So I have my big stock pot here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is add a couple tablespoons of oil. You can use whatever oil you have on hand. A light olive oil will work fine. I have a sunflower oil here. It's like a sunflower coconut oil blend. I just want to start sauteing my onions. And then once my onions start to go translucent, I'm going to add my garlic and let them cook. And then I'll add my ginger and I'm going to add my spice packet, which is just cumin and coriander. And once those have, I'll let them cook in that hot oil with the onion and garlic for about 15, 30 more seconds. We don't want our spices to burn, but we want to get all the flavor out of them. Then we'll add all our liquids. So I'm going to add just a couple tablespoons of oil in there. All right, so I'm going to grab something so I can move my onions very easily.
I'll just pop in and say also, my kitchen smells amazing. Like the ginger and onions and garlic smells so good.
It's gonna smell more amazing too in a second because you're gonna start getting all the spices and everything. It's gonna be awesome. This is one of my favorite recipes to make when it's like pot roast weather, like days like that where it's just cloudy and it's not really pot roast weather right now, but it's still super cozy. This is also, we use this recipe at the food pantry in Browning because it's a great way to have an entirely plant-based meal. So you don't have to start throwing a whole bunch of meat in a pot and it still fills people up and it's full of protein from the lentils. We get to use Montana lentils, which is awesome. And there's an Instapot variation too. You guys have someone doing something with Instapot. So I can give you guys the variation if you're ever just like, I don't want to let this simmer for an hour. I want the Instapot variation. So I'm just transitioning my onions real quick. Okay, we got onions. I should have used a smaller cutting board that I could pick up easier, but So if you've worked with an Instapot before, you probably know that it has a saute function as well as the pressure cooking function. So you can use the saute function on the Instapot to do this part. And then you, of course, are sauteing, you add your garlic like I'm about to do in a second, and then you add your ginger and your spices, and then you add all your liquids with your sweet potato and your lentils, and then you seal it up and cook it at high pressure for like 10 minutes, and then it's done. The end, you have soup. Okay, I'm gonna add my garlic. Just making sure nothing burns here. Depending on how big you cut your onions, it may take them a little longer or shorter to get to kind of a translucent stage. But you guys are able to see where my onions are at there. So I'm going to add in my garlic and my spices. I'm sorry, my ginger and my spices. I already added my garlic. Just lying to you guys. I have my spice packet, just like you guys. So the important thing when I add these spices is I really don't want them to burn. So I'm just gonna stir them up quickly, do this tempering process with my spices. And then I'm going to add my liquids. So I have my coconut milk. I would recommend a can of coconut milk for this because it's that nice full fat coconut milk. But I couldn't find any canned coconut milk at the IGA in Browning. So I found this weird non-dairy half and half with coconut milk. And I think it has almond milk in it too. Anyway, this might not work out as well for me today as it's working out for you guys. But that's what I get for trying to ask the folks at the IGA where the coconut milk was. I was asking them where the pumpkin were. They just were like, we don't know. Oh, okay, guys. Thanks. So I have my can of pumpkin. So I'm just adding my liquids now to this. And I'm just adding all my liquids now so that this is not going to burn my spices that I added in. So just making sure I have a spatula so I can scrape all the pumpkin out of here. And then I just have my vegetable broth. Again, if you're using like a carton of vegetable broth, it's ratioed perfectly for 1 carton. So the food pantry in Browning was trying to figure out a recipe to give folks because we had all of these cans of pumpkin that were donated after Thanksgiving and no one could think of what to do with it besides pie or pumpkin bread. And at that point it was like December. So no one wanted to make pumpkin bread in December, which I think is lame, but All right. So we have our liquids in here now. And then I can add my sweet potatoes. Use this bowl to transfer my sweet potatoes over. Careful if your liquid's hot so they don't go plop. And then I have my little lentils here. So I love these petite crimson lentils for some reason. But I made this recipe just the other day with regular green lentils. I used this recipe for a WIC teaching class using just foods from the WIC list. And so the regular bag of French green lentils are on there. So you can do that with this. It looks a little bit different because these will kind of turn yellow as they cook. And so the green ones will obviously turn kind of a grayish green color. So you'll get a little bit different appearance if you use green lentils versus the red lentils. They're all lentils. It's all fine. The green ones also take a little bit longer because they're a little bit bigger. These guys are kind of teeny for lentils. So make sure you rinse your lentils or they can all stick together when you put them in your pot. So I'm going to rinse them. Okay. Real lazy way of rinsing my lentils, but and then just want to make sure when we get these put in our soup that we're giving it a nice big stir. And I realized I did not find the lid that I need to cover this beforehand. There we go. We're sealed. All right. So we can cover up our soup and just let it simmer. I have it about medium low heat. So I'm just going to let it cook and I'm going to chat with you guys for a little bit. Anyone have any questions about the actual preparation of that? Okay. Kylie's saying no.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I totally relate to you losing the lid. I discovered that my partner and I are going to need to have a talk about where we put utensils after I just tore my entire kitchen apart trying to find a can opener. So that was fun. But I was wondering with the simmering, I never know if I should boil things first and then simmer. Does it really matter with this recipe? Question about that.
It doesn't really matter with this recipe.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just simmer it. You're just trying to get the sweet potatoes basically to where they're nice and soft and kind of melting into your soup. That's
Okay.
what you're really watching for here.
Thanks.
But yeah, this isn't like a meat where you have to make sure that it's at an exact temperature or anything. You're good.
Thanks.
Cool. Also, yes, we have one spot for all the lids, but the lid to the rice cooker goes somewhere different.
Yeah, of course.
My partner has definitely just like put it with the rest of the lids, and I'm like, there's one spot for the rice cooker. I used one sweet potato. Sorry, I'm seeing now this pop up in the chat in case no one saw that pop up in the chat. The question was, do I use one sweet potato or two sweet potatoes? That entirely depends on the size of your sweet potatoes and how much you love sweet potatoes. I used one sweet potato, but it was, let's see. it was a very large sweet potato. This sweet potato is much smaller. Let's see, this is the size of my hand. This sweet potato is smaller than the sweet potato I used. So, and I like sweet potatoes. So I might even use 2 sweet potatoes of this size, and that would be fine. But I used a pretty large sweet potato. I only used 1, and I have a pot full of sweet potatoes. So I'm not mad.
Mariah, earlier in the chat, Brenda and Lisa were agreed that they loved that you used a spoon to peel the ginger, and using tools in our kitchens that we all have. Do you have any other recommendations of different tool or different everyday tools that we can use in place of these fancy things that people try and sell us?
Oh, I mean, that's why with the garlic, that's why I hit it with the side of my knife, because it squeezes it. It's exactly like a garlic press. It helps you get the peel off really quickly, and you don't have to spend all this time buying a garlic press and then cleaning a garlic press. So that's one of the tips I have. But yeah, I mean, with a lot of things, it's hard to think of things on the spot, but there is a lot of value in a spoon, both for obviously peeling ginger, but also removing the seeds out of squash, for example. That's super helpful. If you guys have made jack-o'-lanterns before, you obviously know how helpful just having a big spoon is for taking out seeds of a winter squash. And that same principle applies whether you're cooking a pumpkin or a butternut squash or an acorn squash or whatever type of winter squash you may be eating. It's really easy to roast one of these things by cutting it in half, scooping out the seeds, drizzling it with a little bit of oil, and putting it cut side down on a baking sheet, and you end up with a delicious roasted winter squash, which you can then eat in a variety of different ways, but spoons are helpful for that. Good sharp knife. Always find a good knife sharpener for your kitchen. Sharp knives are safer than dull knives because you don't have to fight with them. So that's a useful skill. And then trying to think, let me just look what I have stashed in my drawers, see if there's any good helpful tips I can think of. Because for most of the stuff I do, I don't spend a lot of money or time investing in little tools that have one purpose for use. So, there are like egg separators. I know that I have a weird habit of making macarons, which are not indigenous and require an oddly specific set of instructions and weighing ingredients and things. But one of the things is obviously to have a meringue. So you're separating your egg whites and your egg yolks. And you can separate your egg yolks and your egg whites using your egg shells, and that is pretty effective. But you can also just crack them into a bowl all together, where you're very unlikely to break an egg yolk in the process, and then take your hand, make sure it doesn't have any water on it, because that is bad for meringue if you're doing something with meringue, and scoop the egg yolks out and put them into whatever you want to put them into. But your hand is a great egg separator. You don't need to buy egg separators. Sometimes they just end up breaking your egg yolks and ruining everything. So that's my thoughts on that too. Cool. Now we have a pot of delicious soup simmering. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more about the work that I do and talk to you guys about teas too. I was actually presenting to a class this morning at Browning High School because the biology students have decided one of their projects is actually going to be starting some seeds for our growing health program at Fast Blackfeet. So I'm on the board of Fast Blackfeet, which is the food access and sustainability team, FAST. And they run the Oyup food pantry, but they also run a food pharmacy program where we have a dietitian nutritionist that can write prescriptions for folks for vouchers for fruits and vegetables at the grocery store. And then through that, they do cooking classes, including this recipe, but also including things like bison and butternut squash lasagna. And we had a bison berry chili that was part of the classes for that. So super delicious recipes that folks get to learn new skills for cooking with new ingredients in their kitchen. And then we also have the Growing Health program. So the Growing Health program originally started as the Growing Health Tea program. And it came out of a desire for the food pantry to distribute healthy beverages to folks. And of course, the healthiest beverage on the Blackfeet Nation is our traditional teas made with native plants that grow here. So we have over 200 plants that are indigenous to the reservation that Blackfeet used for different purposes. Among those are several that we traditionally used for teas, including yarrow, peppermint, horse mint or bee balm, wild bergamot, all the same thing. Serviceberry leaves, huckleberry leaves. We have stinging nettles. We have, don't let your soup boil over. I'm gonna turn this down a little bit. We have, let's see, raspberry leaves. We have elderberries, lots and lots and lots of traditional plants that we've used for teas. So the package that went out to you guys was actually a tea blend that we made that is made of raspberry leaves and yarrow and elderberries. So raspberry leaf is starting to be pretty widely recognized as a good women's tea. And it's kind of like an anti-bloating, nice like cleanser type of tea. It is not limited to women consuming it. Of course, it's like there are some teas that are known as women's teas that are really high in phytoestrogens. This is not one of those teas. So I will mention that. But it's known for kind of helping regulate cycles and just being kind of an anti-bloating tea. And so if you look up raspberry leaf tea online, you will probably come up with immediate search results that say weight loss tea, right? Because people are like red raspberry leaf for weight loss. And I'm sure if you were drinking tea and you were suddenly no longer bloated, you would be like, yes, I feel so trim now. It's just a nice anti-bloating tea. And then the elderberries add a really nice sweet flavor in there. And then yarrow is another really great tea. It has a flavor profile almost similar to tarragon. So you can use yarrow as a seasoning in your kitchen. But yarrow has a couple of other really cool properties. It's a great immune booster. But if you're ever out on the trail, learn to recognize yarrow, or better yet, cut some yarrow whenever you find it next and keep some in your first aid kit, because yarrow has blood clotting properties in it. So if you get a cut on the trail and you chew up some yarrow leaves and you put that on your wound, that'll help stop the bleeding. So Blackfeet warriors traditionally took yarrow with them into battle, but so did the Greek hero Achilles, which is why the scientific name for yarrow is Achillea millefolium, because Greek legends also say that Achilles used that to stop any wounds on the battlefield. And that's what made him invincible. So there you go, yarrow, field medicine. Super helpful to know. And that dried yarrow is just as potent as fresh yarrow for stopping bleeding in the field. There's your field medicine 101, yarrow. I was like, Kylie's making a face and looking at the screen, so I don't know what that means, but there we go. We got the citation there. So I love yarrow. I think it's a super cool, plant, and we have white yarrow and pink yarrow that's native to Montana. But if you go to your local garden store, you'll find yellows and reds and beautiful purples and things like that. So I also have some of those varieties growing in a big pot outside the front door because they're all Achillea millefolium. It's just different species varieties. So there you go. I think yarrow is great. A good plant to know how to recognize terribly crappy soils. So wherever you are in Montana, you should be able to find some. There's a lot of other good plants, but that's the plants that are in the tea blends that you guys have. So whether you're drinking it now or you're drinking it later, it's a good chance to taste some of the flavors of indigenous plants of Montana. Elderberry, you guys have probably, I have no idea if you've had elderberry before, but we do have black elderberry and blue elderberry and dwarf elderberry in the state. Most of it's growing around the Rockies, somewhere in a wetter climate. So I have 5 minutes. So I will tell you guys whatever you want to know for 5 minutes. You guys just better grill me with questions. That's what you have. While your soup simmers. I was like, stop me and ask me a question. If you're like, Mariah, keep talking about plants, I will do that. If you're like, you better tell us how you started your business. Someone should tell me that.
I have a question. Totally awesome, thrilled that you have an Instapot recipe for us. Would love to have any other recipes, indigenous recipes with indigenous foods that you are willing to share as appropriate that we could include in our Instapot work that we are doing.
Yeah, I can pass them your way. I think I have your email somewhere, but I'm not sure. So I definitely, I was gonna say, I have a butternut squash soup recipe, and then we have fun elk roast recipes and stuff that we've done in the pressure cooker and Instapot too. So some of those are on the website. I'm not sure if I put all the Instapot adaptations for them on there, but the butternut soup recipe was kind of made for the pressure cooker. So that's a good one too. So are any of the teas commercially available? If you are interested in teas, you can go to splitsuncreations.com, and that's where we have our teas online there. My partner and I have teas. Kylie, what do you want me to talk about?
I mean, with a few minutes left, so I hate to lob something too heavy at you, but I feel like you probably have some practice at answering when you think about food sovereignty, what does that mean to your work and to your community? How might it differ from, when we think about food access work or hunger? How might it be more specific to the work in indigenous communities, and what do you think we should know and be keeping in mind?
Yeah, for sure. So food sovereignty, of course, has a big definition. And when I'm talking to folks that haven't heard of it before, I will often break it down into that definition because I love how La Via Campesina and the peasants movement have really defined it. So it is the right of people to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food harvested through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and then the right to govern those food systems, which is big, right? But we know that we're looking for food access, which is basically food security is part of food sovereignty, right? We want to make sure that people have access to healthy food, and we want to make sure that everyone at every socioeconomic level has the ability to access that healthy food. And we want to make sure that it's culturally appropriate. So I could design an entire menu based entirely off of like cricket protein and ants and, stinging nettles. But you guys may not recognize those as culturally appropriate, even if we could have a delicious, healthy, and affordable meal planned out, right? So we want to make sure that we recognize those things as food. Stinging nettles, by the way, are delicious. And they make a great tea. And we want to make sure that the methods that we're using to get our food are not harming our ecosystems for the future. And I will also mention that they should not be harming people. So that means that, you know, like plant-based diets can be really great and sustainable and low emissions, but we want to make sure that we're not exploiting people to get those foods either. So we're looking at a variety of different factors. And then of course, the ability to govern those food systems. And as Indigenous communities, we recognize that as sovereign nations, we have the right to write our own food and agricultural codes, to regulate food safety within our communities, to regulate the chemicals and pesticides that we're dumping on the land, to manage the grazing systems of ungulates, and to manage the harvest of wild game animals. All of those things fall within food sovereignty. And food sovereignty is of course connected to our political sovereignty. So as I look past the camera, I see my living room window, and outside is Chief Mountain. And Chief Mountain now lies on the border of Glacier National Park and the Blackfeet Reservation. Originally, our reservation extended to the Continental Divide, all the way to the, I guess up here, it's the Hudson's Bay and the Pacific Drainage, and further south, the Missouri and the Pacific Drainage. But we were forced into dependence on government subsidized food systems, on rations, because it is cheaper in the end to feed the whole flock for a year than to fight them for a week. Essentially, quote from the 1850 Commissioner of Indian Affairs report that wrote about the need to eradicate Indigenous food sovereignty, though they didn't call it that, and force Native people into dependence on rations. And when the rations didn't come, we lost a quarter of our population to starvation in one winter. And in the years following that, our leaders made decisions to sell off portions of our remaining reservation so that we would have money to buy food so that we would not lose more people to starvation. And so as I look out the window and I see Chief Mountain, which is our most sacred mountain to the Blackfoot Confederacy, I see that that land right alongside Chief Mountain, including the summit, was sold so that my ancestors could buy food so that I could be here. So food sovereignty is not just about eradicating type 2 diabetes in our community, combating malnutrition. It's also about our political sovereignty and about the impact that losing our ability to feed ourselves had on our lands, had on our ecosystems, our ability to manage those landscapes and to ensure biodiversity. Our lands miss us just as much as we miss them. And it is about our sense of place. So wherever you are, whether you're Indigenous to the lands you're living on or not, connecting with the foods from those lands, whether wild foraged or things that you can grow or hunt, help you recognize that sense of responsibility that you now have to the land too, and how you can become a caretaker for that place, and the gifts that the land is giving you, and the food that it has to offer and can help feed your family, and just delicious foods that you can recognize your place in Montana and on our homelands. Sorry, Kylie, I went over time.
No, it's all worth it. I'm grateful. That was really powerful. And I think it's good for us all to remember in food access work that food sovereignty is really about tribal sovereignty. And there's a very explicit political relationship and cultural relationship that I think as people looking to support this work, it's really, really critical that we have that context. So I'm grateful that you shared. Thank you. Thank you for your work, for sharing your stories with us. And hopefully you'll be able to join us for the rest of the webinar. If you're planning on using your next hour to do that, that would be great. And I'll just give us a 5-minute break to stretch our legs and do what we need to do, stir the pot. And we'll come back at 4:05 to hear from Brenda and Havila and Lynette and Lisa. So let's go ahead and take that 5 and we'll see you in a few minutes.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. I have got water boiling to enjoy some of that women's blend tea with all the healthy benefits that Mariah described. I'm looking forward to that. And I am going to kick it over to Eliza now, who's going to lead us in the next portion of our conversation.
Thanks, Kylie. That was really fun to have that demonstration by Mariah. I wasn't able to join along in my kitchen as I have a 1.5-year-old running along my kitchen, but it was so relaxing just to watch her cook. And I am really excited to make that recipe later on. So I'm really excited to introduce our next presenters and let them tell you about the amazing work that they're doing to advance food security in their communities. So they're going to take some time over the next 20 minutes, half an hour to let you know about their projects. First, we're going to hear from Brenda Richey and Havila Burton from Montana State University, their federally recognized tribal extension program. Brenda and Havila will talk about the program extension has that works to address the challenge of food insecurity on the Flathead Reservation. So I'm going to turn it right over to Brenda and Havila.
Hey, everybody. I'm just, if you guys, Eliza, if you will direct me for my PowerPoint. Am I sharing that or are you?
I think Kristen's about to put it right there.
We go. Maybe I was missing a cue and wanted to check in. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having Havila and myself here. I'm Brenda Richey, and I am the MSU Extension FERTEP agent. We are a federally recognized tribal extension program through the university. I've lived here on the Flathead Reservation for almost 30 years, have raised my family here, and am lucky and fortunate and blessed to live where I live. Havila, if you would introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. My name is Havila Burton, and I grew up here on the Flathead Reservation and then spent 15 years off gallivanting in different places, and just recently moved back. I just graduated from Montana State University this last spring and then got to move home, and I'm so thankful to be here and so thankful to be working with Brenda and be back on the Flathead Reservation.
Thank you, Havila. As we move on to our next slide, I want to also celebrate and ditto on what Mariah just shared with us. I am not going to be able to say that land statement any more beautifully than she said it. But as a Montana State University Extension employee, Havila and I both want to make it clear that we understand that we are living and working in traditional homelands and within a sovereign government and people. That we do see it as a moral and ethical responsibility we have to make sure that the programming that we offer and the research that we do through our office is appropriate to the people in the community that we work with, and that we celebrate and honor those traditions and culture, and recognize them for the immense value that they are. And it is our pleasure and our honor to work with the tribes that we do, but also when we partner and collaborate across the state of Montana with other tribal nations as well. If I can have our next slide, please. Havila, this one's yours.
Thanks. So I didn't mention when I introduced myself that I work through the SNAP Ed program, which is a nutrition education program that runs through the USDA SNAP food stamp. It's not food stamps anymore. They don't call it that, but that's what it's through, is that food nutrition piece from the national government that way. And I don't hand out SNAP benefits, but I do nutrition education. So the challenge that we saw coming into the last year, and I was hired primarily to teach teen and adult nutrition classes on the Flathead Indian Reservation. And we saw that, as you can see here, that teens are taking on the responsibilities of adults a lot of times. A lot of times when I teach teen classes, those kids are responsible for grocery shopping for their families. They are responsible for going to food pantries and getting food for their families, and they're responsible for cooking for themselves and other members of their family. So that's the challenge, is how do we help kids learn how to cook healthy food and feed their families well.
Our story really starts a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, with a 4-H community collaborative grant that we had, where we started talking about how do we address food insecurity to build towards food sovereignty. And in the conversation that we were having with that grant, we were discovering that through some of our local community development centers and food banks, they were sharing with us that adults and youth were not willing to take unprepared or foods that weren't pre-cooked already, or they only wanted the canned goods. They didn't want to use food resources that included, dried legumes, dried rices, other things that took time to prepare, including some of our traditional foods, such as our wild game and bison that came along. And so I'm like, why? We asked that, why don't they want to take those foods? And when we spoke with some of those members of the community, they shared with us 3 things. And this is what we built that program. And then successfully now have also included the No Kid Hungry grant. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. The first thing was they shared, we don't have the equipment. We found out there were homes without stoves. Well, we can offer a cooking class, and if there's no way to go home and implement that knowledge, what was the point of teaching them to cook? They're required to go down to Town Pump and buy a corn dog because that's what they can put in a microwave. Okay, so they didn't have the tools. Then they said, well, how do you cook dried beans? I mean, they wanted the can of the Pop the Top chili. Well, how do you cook dried beans? How do you cook rice? Again, if they don't have the knowledge of what to do with those dried foods, those healthier food resources, then there's no point in taking it because they don't know what to do with it. It's going to sit on the shelf, right? And then last but not least, it was, if we don't have the equipment, we don't know what to do with it. How do we get that connection to the food resource? Where do I even go? Town Pump I can walk to. Where is the local CDC or the Community Development Center? Where's the food bank? So that's how this whole story started. That grant came to a conclusion, and Lisa sent out an email, hey, here's this other grant. And I said, no, I'm busy. I have 9 functioning grants right now. I'm done. And she personally called me and she's like, have you thought about this? And I will always appreciate that, because it was through her personal outreach that I realized this was a grant we really needed to continue the conversation, because now we were hearing from local high schools about starting food banks for teenagers in the high school. And we're back to that same conversation. How do we encourage teenagers to resource healthy foods, use healthy foods, and prepare them? So we're back to those 3 pillars again. So in comes No Kid Hungry. They made it so simple to apply for this grant. Thank you. And so No Kid came in and said, look, we're going to provide the funding. And with that funding, we purchased measuring cups, spoons, cutting boards, the washing brushes, and the Instapot. Okay. I said, now I'm SU Extension. I am required. It has to be research-based curriculum, blah, 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 blah. I have 9 grants. I can't go teach this. What are we going to do? Havila to the rescue. We hired Havila. Yay, jazz hands all aboard. She came in. We partnered with Snap Ed. I called the director at that time and I said, look, I know Snap Ed typically teaches their 9-week lesson out of an electric skillet. Would you please give us permission to use Instapots? Because we can do so much more. And she got back to me, she goes, yeah, let's do that. Let's do a pilot run using adult curriculum with our juniors and seniors in high school. I do want to clarify, we chose juniors and seniors because of the safety factor of using a pressure cooker type instrument and tool, right? And Havila is going to come in, implement research-based curriculum, give them the tools they need, the knowledge they need, and connect them to local food resources, both within the high school and within the community, right? So now we have research-based curriculum, we have the tools, and now we have our high school partnerships. Havila was my boots on the ground person. This program would not have happened without Havila. She went into all 5 of our local high schools, 4 of them. So all of this has happened since October, you guys. So within this school year, we were able to get into 4, Havila, correct me if I'm wrong, 4, correct, of our high schools. She's nodding her head. Okay. And we partnered with the FCS teachers. And through that, we had an audience that was there on a weekly basis. We could implement the teaching and make that connection. We are finding out, Havila will talk about this in a few moments, that across the state and across our nation, our high schools budgets are being cut. We all know this, and we are losing our FCS programs. This is the perfect way of continuing healthy nutrition education through some sort of PE class or extracurricular, some way of continuing to educate our youth in the ways of what do I do to provide healthy, nutritious meals for myself and or my family or my future, because we're building futures, right? So Havila, I know you have something you want to say about the Snap Ed program, and I'll let you take it to the next slide.
Thanks. So I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit more about what I experienced in the high schools, and I had so much fun. It was such a enriching experience for me to work with the different high school students. And what I found is that, and I love, Mariah, what you were talking about with the food sovereignty piece, working with ownership and responsibility on reservations to, and wherever you are, whoever you are, to know where you get your food and where it comes from and what your connection to the land is. So I really appreciate that. And I really appreciated that piece with my teenagers. A lot of them haven't thought through where their food comes from or how to access food. And they're going to be hitting their adult years very soon. And they're going to be needing to act more and more as adults as they grow up more and as they learn how to access these foods on their own. So in our classes, we walked through those food access issues and we talked about, where do you access food? And they would say, oh, the grocery store. And I would say, okay, where else do you access food? And well, I go hunting. Yes, that's a fantastic way to access food. That's something that most Montanans have access to in one way or another. And I love that here on the reservation, it's a tribal member privilege to be able to hunt. And a lot of the kids that I was teaching have that privilege and are able to go and hunt and provide food for their families. So we talked about food access. And then we also talked about how to cook, like Brenda was saying, how to cook the food once you have access to it. So if you bring food home, and this isn't like, a lot of these kids are very familiar with fast food restaurants and very familiar with how to order a cheeseburger, but they don't necessarily know how to cook a pot of beans or how to use the food that they could harvest from their garden. A lot of them have family members that garden, but they didn't know necessarily how to use those foods. So that was a huge educational piece that we worked with. And then I love this. Thanks for going on to this next slide. This is a picture from one of my classes. This is in Ronan, and we had lots of I just loved working with the kids there. It was super fun. So those are lentils in there. And I appreciate, Mariah, you pointing out how great a Montana crop lentils are. I loved using lentils in the Instant Pot like you were talking about too. And I just wanted to point out some of these quotes from my teenagers this last year in classes. I got loads and loads of quotes from them, just super interested in learning how to cook and learning how to help support their families through the Instant Pots. A lot of them were excited to take the Instant Pot back home so they could use it in their households, and their moms were like, oh yeah, you better come cook me dinner now. But I love this last quote about the child who's thinking ahead to those college years and recognizing, oh, maybe I won't have to eat ramen noodles all the way through college. I can cook myself other foods now that I have the tools. So I love putting together the pieces of the tools and the education, and then the knowledge of how to cook and the skills to move forward with those things.
Next slide, please. There you go. So I know we went over time. Sorry, we tried. For more questions about food sovereignty work or partnering, I would encourage all of you that may work with a tribal nation or that might be close to one of our federally recognized tribal extension programs. We have 4 of them in the state of Montana. We have 8 federally recognized tribes. 4 of those do have FERTEP offices on them. I am glad to help you connect. I know every single one of them is doing food sovereignty work. So I'm glad to help you with that. Thank you, Lem Lunch. Apologize.
No, you're fine. That was really great. Thank you both for sharing the work that you're doing. Before we move on, are there any questions for Brenda or Havilah? And if you have questions later, we'll provide contact information, and you can always reach out to them after that. So we'll just, I don't see any, so we'll just kind of keep moving on. Next we're going to hear from Lynette Two Bulls, and Lynette is the director of Yellowbird Lifeway Center, and she is going to tell us about their food sovereignty program on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. And I didn't say this before we started, but we're highlighting these programs as really a way to show what is happening in communities. And this is happening across the state with a lot of different organizations. And so it's just really exciting to hear about, you could hear in Brenda's voice and Havilah's voice, and I know you're going to hear in Lynette's voice, just about the excitement they have for the work that they're doing and the importance of the work that they're doing for their communities. So with that, I will let Lynette take it away.
Lynette, you're on mute. Stop.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, I'll start again. I just want to thank you all for inviting me to share a little bit about Yellowbird Lifeway Center Food Sovereignty Program. We've been doing this work for some time now, and now we see it's food sovereignty has become such a big issue now. Like, people are recognizing it and they're trying to understand it and they're connecting to it. And it makes me so happy because, we've been doing this for a long time, just really reconnecting. We use 3 R's. So we're reminding, reconnecting, and reclaiming our food systems, both traditional and reconnecting to more contemporary food systems as well. And so that's what we do through our food sovereignty work. We're moving our community. We're located on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Lame Deer, Montana. So we're moving our community from food insecurity to food sovereignty, and doing that by helping them with gardening. And Kylie, were you able to get the slides that I sent over, or the images that I sent over?
I did get those. I sent them to Kristen. I don't know if they made it to Kristen in time. Kristen,
Okay.
Did you?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'll just talk about it. So our food sovereignty program, our garden program, we basically provide all of the support, the supplies to create gardens. So this past year, you know, after the pandemic, we've seen this huge need in our community. And we went from putting in 30 gardens to this past year, 130 gardens. And that's how many people had signed up. So we put in gardens, all phases, different types of gardens, from people that are first starting, you know, starting with a garden with boxes, garden boxes, to full gardens in the ground. And, you know, one of the things that we've seen through all of our applications that we get, we made sure that we asked questions that are going to help us serve our community better. And one of the things that we found out that 80% of all of the people that applied last year were first-time gardeners. So, you know, everything that we do at Yellowbird is we reconnect people, we reconnect our elders with young people. So those are the two age groups that through Yellowbird, all of our programming, those are, you know, those are important to our people in our circle of life, because our children represent the future generations, and the elders represent the knowledge and the wisdom that needs to be passed to the future generations. So everything, all of the programs we do at Yellowbird focus on those two age groups. And when you do that, the family comes along with it. You know, we love our children, and so we support our children. So that's kind of what we see. And so, you know, just looking at those statistics of there's a whole age group that is disconnected from food. You know, they don't know where food comes from. They don't understand food systems. Their idea of food is going to fast food or something that's quick. You know, like I heard them talking about, you know, something quick and fast, and they don't fully understand. So knowing that 80% of the people were, you know, first-time gardeners, and about 70% of those were young women under the age of 30. And so if you think about that, it's, you know, we have a lot of work to do, but it's also very exciting because they're wanting to reconnect. And 95% of all of our people that were a part of the program are women. And women are the foundation of our nations. And we have a saying amongst our Northern Cheyenne people, that the hearts of the women, a nation is not conquered until the hearts of the women are on the ground. And, you know, what we see is our women, our hearts are not on the ground. You know, we're the foundation, we have a big responsibility. And so through our programs, we're reconnecting our women back to some of their greatest responsibility. And in our culture, we believe that is to nurture. So as women, we're nurturers, we're givers, you know, it's in our DNA. And so when we, you know, provide these opportunities to reconnect back to our community and back to women and back to these young people, you know, it's, they're reconnecting to the land, they're reconnecting to their life ways. It's not, yeah, you can see one of this was last year's program there. So it just shows, you know, everything that we offer through Yellowbird and our garden program. But it's not just about gardening. So we're reconnecting back to our plant medicines, traditional ecological knowledge, health and wellness. And I loved the Instapot, all of the information with the Instapot. I love that because, that's being creative, using our imagination to find ways to reconnect our youth. And I love that idea. We're looking at more and more ways to connect our youth back. And so this year, that's one of the things that we're focusing on is our young people, creating programs where our young people, will come in and they'll learn, they'll get to be a part of the gardens, like our Yellowbird Gardens. They'll get to be a part of going out to help people put in their own gardens. So they're going to understand and learn about all phases of gardening and reconnecting to the earth, because we're connected to the land. It's a part of our culture, and we're connected to Mother Earth like we were connected to our mother through that umbilical cord. And that's how powerful that connection is. And the land, we say Mother Earth provides everything that we need. It all comes from the land. And so all of our programs are deeply rooted in a way of life. That's why we say Yellowbird Lifeways, because that's what we do. We connect back to land, language, culture, identity. And it's natural for our young people, for our community. It feels right when we share in this way with that as the foundation. And so the other thing that we really need to focus on this year is physical space, food sovereignty center, a center where we can, implement all of these programs, because really the land is our school. The land is, everything that we do is outside, but we're moving to a place where we need a physical center. So that's kind of what we're focusing on this year, and just really focusing on our young people, reconnecting them back. And let me see if there's anything else. There was, and some of our other programs are our virtual programs. During the pandemic, we seen this need we used to gather physically. And because the pandemic, when it came, we could not do that no longer. So we started a virtual program every Saturday morning, and we call it Food for Life. And we bring in speakers. Ashley Mariah was on our show back in December, and she made, butternut lasagna, I think it was. It's so awesome. And so we bring in presenters where they'll share about food sovereignty. We've had like Lisa Ironcloud, that's really reconnecting back to our Buffalo Nation and all of the teachings around the buffalo, how to butcher, how to, make dried meat, how to cut the meat, so it's more than just gardening, foraging for our medicines, going out into the land. And I have an example of, these are wild turnips right here. So we go out, we'll take the young people out, and we'll actually go onto the land. And these are all wild turnips. They're the skin, the outer layer is taken off, and then you take and you braid it. You braid the ends, and this is just a short one. This was really long. So I've been using this all winter long. I cut them off and use them in our soups and different ways, but this is an example of our wild turnips. So foraging, our connection to corn. Here is one of our corn, our Indian corn that we grew. And we're connected to the stories, and we're connected to, where we come from. We have stories about corn and how it's part of our sacred foods. And we use that in all of our ceremonies. And so, it's just not about gardening, but it's learning about the stories that come with it. And so when our people, when they can hear these and they connect, they have a deep connection. It's not just, they're hearing about it and learning about it. It's a spiritual connection that we have to food, to our food systems, to the land, to all the animal nations, you know, and so the hunting is also a part of that. You know, when we go out and hunt, how, you know, what do we do? Do we offer, you know, tobacco for these animals that are going to offer their life to us? So, you know, there's a lot of different aspects to this culturally that we connect our people back to. And when you do that, it's like a deep, deep connection that they have. And it's a deep knowing and understanding. So it's not on a surface level, but it's on a deep, deep level. So those are just some of the things that, you know, we offer all of the supplies, all of the, you know, for the gardens, just like any type of gardening supplies that you need, all of the seeds, seed saving, you know, and from beginning to end, you know, including we give out to store, you know, our foods, both contemporary and traditional ways of food storage. And so now we're moving into this other area. That's why I really loved the whole session from Mariah to, you know, the Instapot, because now we're moving into diet, cooking, you know, how to prepare these foods, how to apply it, you know, from growing, bringing it in your home. Now, how are you going to cook it? How are you going to connect to it? And I love the Instapot idea because youth, our young people, you know, they also want to learn. They want to connect. They want to know. And so when you offer them ways that are simple, where they know that they can do it, and then you give them the experience of doing it, you know, I think that, you know, we have to be innovative. We have to use our imagination to find ways to help all people connect. And so food sovereignty, I love Mariah's definition of food sovereignty. That's what it is, you know, and so everything that we do is moving, you know, from food insecurity to food sovereignty. And so I'll just end there. And if anyone has any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynette. It was just so great to hear about the work you're doing. Are there any questions for Lynette right now in the work they're doing? Again, if there's anything that comes up, we are happy to make a connection if there's something that comes up later on. Great. So as we move into the next part of our event, which is going to take kind of a deeper look at supporting the work of food sovereignty in Montana and supporting the work of programs like we heard about, I'm really excited to introduce a really great partner and an organization that's been supporting not only these two programs you just heard about, but a lot of other food sovereignty programs across the state. Lisa Lee is the executive director of No Kid Hungry, and she's going to just talk a little bit about kind of what funding looks like from No Kid Hungry and some of their priorities and what they've been working on. So Lisa, I will pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, and thanks for having me. It's really hard to follow these amazing women. I just wanted to hear more about all of that. It's funny hearing Brenda speak highly of No Kid Hungry when I think just as highly, if not more, of the work that you're doing, Brenda. When we called and talked to each other, and honestly, you shared your idea about an Instapot, I was just like, makes complete sense, you know, and you had all the problems laid out. You did all the work. Like, I'm just so grateful to have these amazing partners. And Lynette is like the call after of, hey, I have this idea, I'd like to start more gardens. And then it's like, yeah, we offered 130 gardens last year. That's a huge number, you know, like, I just can't speak highly enough of, the work that you're all doing on the ground. So yes, I'm Lisa Lee. I'm the director of Montana No Kid Hungry, and I've been in this position since We began in 2012, which is a decade ago already. And No Kid Hungry is set up as a public-private partnership in Montana. And we're housed here at the Department of Public Health and Human Services, and in partnership with a national nonprofit called Share Our Strengths No Kid Hungry campaign. And Share Our Strength has No Kid Hungry presence in all 50 states. And although the No Kid Hungry campaign in Montana is housed in state government, all of our funding is privately raised. So just to kind of give you a snapshot of who we are. So we really collaborate with communities around healthy food solutions to improve food access now and look at systems change work to end hunger for good. So it's that balance, right? People need food now. You can't survive without food now, and you can't ask somebody to wait a day. So it is just as important as like solving the problem in the long run and looking at all the systems that need to be connected and improved. That's why my heart is really with tribal food sovereignty. One of the strategies that we do at No Kid Hungry is to offer grants to local communities. It just makes sense. This looks different based on the communities, and it helps to meet everyone with where they're at while providing support if they need it around best practices, where we can glean information from across the nation and across Montana. We can help monitor progress and success at both a local level and a statewide level, and share and connect programs directly. So that's kind of in essence as to how we see that. We're not only preventing hunger with this work. The type of food matters just as much, and both of these women spoke to that. And we need to look at food as medicine to also prevent these food-related diseases like diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and heart disease, all of which are extremely prevalent in Montana and across the nation. And when we look at improving food access, making sure that it's healthy food matters more now than ever. And this is why you'll start to hear more and more, if you dive into this work, the term nutrition security. And so just to kind of give a heads up on that. But, you know, as a funder, No Kid Hungry realized that it was just really important to be nimble. It's helping programs do the important work and trying not to get in the way of that. Less time on paperwork. You know, we don't want them to try and fit into a specific box that we would like checked, you know, on the funder side. So we're really trying to remove ourselves and streamline the applications as much as possible to make it really easy for the applicants. Because that's really what kind of changed the game on our end as soon as we started doing that and broadening our thinking around what grant making is. We've noticed that when we announce grant cycles more broadly, we almost always get applications from known suspects, most in the urban areas, and those having a lot more staff and resources across the state. And therefore, we're very deliberate on our outreach because we're really trying to reach the areas of greatest need and then provide that wraparound support if they need it to help develop their concept or help with grant writing, whatever they need. If they don't need support beyond funding, we fully step back and get out of their way, which, you know, with both Brenda and Lynette, you've needed nothing more than funding, and you just kind of run with it and show these amazing results. And I just can't tell you how easy it is from my perspective. So all the credit goes to the grantees and the programs themselves locally. Now, we are about building those relationships and trust with local organizations and people so we can support them long term. Now, you heard these women here today. They are leaders. They know their community, and they're the ones actually getting the work done. So that's our learning from this. As you know, we step back and look at how much we learn from each of the grantees, and we're continuously reevaluating how we can do better as a partner to them. So we're trying just as hard on our end and not seeing it one-sided at all. And from my experience, it's most important for funders to create those strong relationships and trust, but be flexible at the same time. Our organization started shifting to this philosophy pre-COVID, and if anything, COVID helped to confirm that this is what needs to happen when looking at creating sustainable food and hunger solutions at a local, at a regional, and even at a statewide level. We know this problem of childhood hunger is something we can solve. So we are not going anywhere until we have ended it. The need is great for grant making. We can't be it for everyone. So I'm really happy to have the Montana Women's Foundation here today and just wanting to learn more, because that's where it starts. Yeah, and you just heard a number of a few examples, I guess, today of Indigenous food sovereignty work in Montana, and there are so many more. And if you have interest in specific projects or areas of interest within Montana, please reach out. I'd be happy to share more and connect you directly with programs. But thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. I think I probably echo a lot of people when I say that No Kid Hungry has just been a phenomenal partner and support for so many organizations across the state, and the work you do is really critical in the state. So I applaud you and the work that you do, and the work I know you're going to continue to do in trying to end childhood hunger in Montana. So, we just really briefly want to kind of talk about at Montana Community Foundation, we've been really excited to be able to start focusing in on and supporting Indigenous-led organizations and communities through a lot of different funds. We have been able to support Indigenous food sovereignty efforts through a couple different programs, including our COVID-19 funding, which was used for COVID-19 recovery, and made some grants to Fort Belknap, Little Shell, Flathead, and Chippewa Cree to support their programs. And we were also able to utilize funding that was allocated for wildfire recovery and preparedness to make a grant, actually to No Kid Hungry, that was then supported other food sovereignty projects across the state. And I really want to just share that to show that food sovereignty really hits so many different aspects. It's not, part of it is food security and increasing food and getting people fed, but food security is a foundation to being prepared and a resilient community. And so we try to really look at it broadly and be able to support projects in any way we can. And, with our grant making, I really appreciate how No Kid Hungry has really been able to reflect and respond to grant making for what works best for organizations. And as she said, sometimes it's helping with technical assistance, and sometimes it's just giving them money and getting out of the way. And so we are, we're really learning from partners like No Kid Hungry and trying to make sure our grant making is community led, because we believe that that's important and impactful to allow the communities to decide where funding is needed, whether we're talking about COVID-19 or other recovery efforts. Communities know where they need the funding more than I do, or more than any of our staff do. So we really try to support communities in that way. And so that kind of leads us to, we have just, about 10 more minutes. We really want to kind of be able to open up a discussion and a conversation about how philanthropy can support food sovereignty efforts, looking at individuals and funders. And we would really love to hear from Brenda and Lynette. And I don't think Mariah's still on the call, but to just hear from you about how can we as funders best support your efforts and the work that we're doing. So I'm going to just kind of open it up to not just Lynette and Brenda and Havilah, but anybody else that kind of wants to be involved in this conversation about, funding to support for these sort of projects. And I think there's enough, not too many of us, so you can even just jump off mute and or throw something in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Well, I love that. I'll go, I guess. This is Lynette Two Bulls. I love what both of you said, about allowing the organizations, like, we know best what our community needs. And I think during the pandemic, it was really, really evident, because we're, like, Yellowbird is a grassroots organization. So we're connected to the grassroots people, and everything that we do is based on a whole way of life. So it's done from the ground up, from the back forward. And that's how we lead our community. So we're not at the front, we're not at the top, but we're actually at the bottom. And the way Yellowbird was formed was, my companion, my husband, is one of the chiefs of the Northern Cheyenne people. And so we have a responsibility to give to the community, to help the community, to uplift and empower the community. And so when the pandemic hit, we were poised to immediately, we know what the needs of the community are. So I think, with the funders, I love that. I love that about No Kid Hungry. The grant that they provided was really, really needed. And, I think that funders are finally starting to open their eyes to that and to understand that, we're in our communities, we know, what our communities need, we know what our needs are. And as far as Yellowbird right now, that's kind of the area that we're moving into, because of the growth of the food sovereignty movement and the growth in our community, and people seeing, they didn't have access to food during the pandemic, and so now they're like, we want to be able to grow our own food. We want to be able to, learn to can our food, learn to cook our food, how to cook for our families. And one of the stories that a young person, we went to her home and she had like 4 little ones, and she was only like 26 years old, and all of her children were just, they were all little, and she wanted a garden so she could start learning how to cook for them healthy foods. And she told my husband, she said, my grandparents used to have a garden, and I remember when I was a little girl, I used to have to help them in their garden. And so my husband told her, I know your grandparents. And he started talking to her about where the garden was, how they had this huge, huge garden. And she was like so excited, that he knew her because they're both gone now. And that, he used to, he knew about them. And so those connections are, they're really important in our communities. And those are the kind of connections that, we have, these organizations, we have those in our community. And so we know. So I just, I really appreciate the fact that both of you said that, both Lisa and Elisa stated that. So.
Great, thank you, Lynette. Are there any, in the last couple minutes, any, Brenda, I just saw you went off mute. Do you have something to add?
I was just gonna ditto what Lynette said, and she said it so beautifully. I was just thinking from a grant writer perspective. I think I shared earlier that I actually turned this down because I already had 11 active grants in the office. I couldn't even encompass in my brain having to write, when you say write a grant and all that goes into it, I'm like, Lisa, I can't, no, I ignored the email. But she reached out, and I'm so thankful, and we've been blessed that No Kid Hungry did. And because of that simplified process and giving us that leeway to lead within our community, you know, those funders, you may or may not necessarily live in our community. We do. We live and breathe here. And so having you entrust us to be honorable in our intention and making it a simplified process, and then let us prove to you what we can do. And that's that collaborative effort when we come together instead of constantly, you know, they say, don't recreate the wheel. Well, we all have a spoke and we can all build that wheel together, and then let us do it. Even the reporting, I was dreading. I was like, oh, we've got to do our first quarter report. And I popped in there and I put it off for like 2 weeks. I was down to the last day, and it took me like 15 minutes. I was like, holy cow, why was I stressing about this? Well, because the other 11 grants require 14 days to do a report, you know? And so this was just such a beautiful way of really, I'm going to say an indigenous way of supporting a community, because when I start handing paperwork out in my community, I have had it said, that is a European way of thinking. That is a Westernized way of thinking. Why do I have to fill out a piece of paper? We're not Western. We're not European. The Indian way is to come together as a family. What is the need? And we work together to answer to the need. If you have a piece of it that you can contribute, great. Here comes No Kid Hungry. If Lynette has that personal connection to the history and to the people, that's beautiful. She and her husband and her family and that leadership brings that to it. As an ally, what can I bring to the piece of the puzzle so that together we create the whole picture? And that is the indigenous way, the family way of solving our problems and challenges, no matter what they are, within our communities. And so I'm so grateful that Lisa, you know, stuck it out with me and meeting you guys here and the beautiful stories that you shared. I've had goosebumps, I've had tears. I'm like, okay, now I'm fulfilled. My cup has been refilled, and maybe there's a point to sticking this out, you know, on those days when you're like, oh, I can't do it anymore. So thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I very much appreciate it today.
Wow, those are some really great sentiments and words. And I'm gonna hand it over to Kylie here in a minute just to wrap things up. But I just want to thank everybody that was on the call today, everybody that presented and shared their stories and the work that they're doing. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's really incredible to hear what you are doing. So I want you to know that it's inspiring, it's important work. And we're just really excited to be able to hopefully be a partner. Brenda, I like that you said, you know, use the word ally, be an ally, and partner moving forward. So with that, I will hand it back over to Kylie for the last couple words.
Great, thanks. I'll just echo Elisa's gratitude to everyone for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and learning alongside us. I will say there's a survey. We'd love to hear what you thought of this long format, but a little bit interactive and a little bit educational. You can hear my puppy in the background. She is over it. So apologies about that. But I just want to the best of my memory, reiterate the food sovereignty definition that Mariah left us with, which was access to healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate food harvested in an ecologically sound manner without doing harm to people, and leaving the right of the people to govern those food systems. And I will just say it is no small task that the folks that are here are embarking on. And we're grateful for it because our food system is broken in so many ways. And much like Lynette was talking about, this obligation to nurture, I really do think we all have an obligation to participate in these sorts of endeavors. And so an email will go out with the recording of this webinar and also the links to the projects And I think the links to the projects were shared in the chat as well. Consider thanking these leaders for what you learned from them today by thinking about a financial contribution to their work. Think about what it means to support food sovereignty longer term and in bigger and broader systemic ways and political ways as well. And reach out to us with any questions. We look forward to working alongside all of you as grantees and funders moving forward. So thank you all so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.